Hi, my name is Sam Alfred. I'm the lead designer programmer on Terra Nil, and great to be here.
So Sam, where did the idea for this game come from?
So originally, Terra Nil came from a game jam. It came from a Ludum Dare, I think in 2019, and the theme of that jam was start with nothing. So our interpretation of that theme was literally a wasteland. There's nothing there, and and we're going to repopulate it with life. But it was also, we wanted to make something where you were bringing life back to something, building with nature from the very beginning. We wanted to make something where you were building nature rather than other things.
That's a big swing from a game like Broforce that has a lot of raw destruction. What was it like moving from that genre to like a more zen-like contemplative nature of Terra Nil?
So one of the interesting things about Free Lives is, as an organization, we're allowed a large amount of creative freedom, and we kind of have this process where if you, as a designer or anyone really at the studio, come up with a concept and you create a prototype and you can demonstrate its effectiveness commercially and in terms of audience appeal, the studio will, generally speaking, give you some resources to pursue that. And then if you keep proving it, then you'll get more resources. And so actually, although I worked on Broforce, I was originally hired to work on Broforce, but like way after the release of Broforce. I was much more interested. I've always been more interested in strategy games and slower paced things. And so, yeah, when we sort of got the ball rolling with this Terra Nil prototype, and as you can imagine, a lot of Free Lives processes around testing the prototypes, testing them in the real world. We do a lot of things on itch. More people started joining the team. We started getting more resources, and that's how we got the ball rolling.
Now, can you talk about some of the like build? Because, like I said, this is a really unique sim game where usually you're destroying things to create things, but now you're creating things from nothing. Can you talk about some of the tiers that we'll go through to create, and some of the buildings that we'll use to kind of make this hostile wasteland back into an oasis?
What we try and do, what every level of Terra Nil does, is it roughly speaking, maps into how you would go about reclaiming an environment in the real world, insofar as you've got to start with water, you've got to start with dealing with erosion, and you've got to start with pioneer species of plants, as they're called, hardy plants that are going to grow in poor conditions. So having said that, there is a lot of fantastical stuff in Terra Nil. We have like toxin scrubbers, and we have riverbed excavators which shoot like drill bits and things like that. So it is inspired by how this process might work in the real world, but it's not strictly adhering to it. Anyway, once you've done that, you begin introducing biodiversity into the world. And what that means is generally multiple different biomes come into play. So you might have a forest, you might have a wetland, you might have mangroves or coral reefs or things like that. And generally those are more difficult and they require specific conditions. Maybe the climate has to be modified slightly, the temperature, the humidity. Then you begin to introduce animals and fauna. Once you do that, you can sort of leave the animals to become the custodians of the ecosystem as you recycle all of your gear and all of your materials and then leave it in peace.
Do you see this game potentially hitting an educational angle as it helps people learn about fixing the climate and conserving nature?
Yes, insofar as we hope that it inspires people to learn more. We hope that it inspires players to think about and perhaps learn some things about the natural world, but we're not an educational game per se. Like I said, our technology in some cases is inspired by the real world, and in some cases are completely fantastical. So I wouldn't call it an educational game per se, but it's definitely a game that wants to get its players to think.
And then you mentioned some of the biomes and some of the pioneer plants and species. That sounds like super educational. So I think you're in a way like it's going to it's not an educational game, but people can be educated while playing it, because I didn't know that until I interviewed you just now. So
Well, that's the hope. That is the hope. Like, whenever we try to, so the different levels of Terra Nil take place in different geographical regions around the world. And although it doesn't take place on Earth, each of the geographical regions was inspired by one of the major climate classification regions from the Köppen-Geiger climate classification system. So what that meant was, whenever we started building the content for a new region, we would actually do research on what are the plants that grow there, what are the animal species that live there, and try and come up with mechanics inspired by those things. So in many ways, the real world, although we don't perfectly map to the real world did inspire some of our mechanics.
So are there going to be like different levels you progress through in a campaign? Is it kind of like an indefinite mode where you just grow as much as you can before a timer runs out? Talk about like how you win and progress through the game.
So it was actually very important to us that it's a curated and bespoke experience. The design philosophy around Terra Nil in many aspects is a reaction to how normally in this genre you can play forever. It's kind of like you build your city forever, you build your factory forever, you keep getting more resources, and the whole point of Terra Nil is about working with what you have. So it didn't make sense for us to make the game endless. Every level has a concrete start and end, and by the same token, the game has a concrete start and an end. So to answer your question, there is a progression where you go through a whole bunch of different regions on a world map, and slowly you're restoring different regions of a planet, and by the end of the game you will have restored the entire planet. And then we have some additional game modes after you've restored the planet. There are alternate variations. I think for a while we called them B-sides, because that's what they're called in Celeste, of each of the levels. But yeah, so that's generally the progression as we see it.
That couldn't have been a decision you guys made lightly. I mean, people talk about that. I think it's called Factoria all the time, where you could just build indefinitely and it's a never-ending game. Was that something you guys originally wanted to do but changed your mind during the production process? Or like, just kind of get us behind the thought process of why you didn't want to make this game an endless sim that you just manage stuff forever?
I suppose it's easier to give you an example from one of the simpler mechanics, and that'll sort of explain why we didn't want to make the whole game endless. Is in the second phase of restoration, the biodiversity phase, you're required to, as a player, restore either 3 or 4 different kinds of biodiversity, different biomes, and you have a limited size on your map. Your map is always the same size, which effectively means that if you're using some space for one biome, you are not going to be able to use that space for a different biome. And it's not the kind of game where you can buy more land to get that other biome. The whole point is that the game is balanced in such a way that you need to find a harmonious balance of all of these things. And in this respect, it didn't really make sense with the philosophy and the design pillars of the game to make it an infinite game. Are we going to get people on Steam saying, this game's too short? Yes, of course we are. But it's a decision we were willing to make to support what we thought was the vision of the game.
Thoughts about expansions and DLC down the road? If so, what kind of, if not, what kind of content ideas are you playing with now that you can talk about or would like to see in your game eventually?
We haven't like publicly announced anything. There are loads of wonderful modes and features that we would love to see. I can't promise any of them, but some of them might include things like a sandbox mode that allows players to pick and choose from all the different regions of the world and make their own experience that way. Or perhaps like a map scripting, because all the maps in Terra Nil are procedurally generated from scripts. So exposing that to players so they can generate their own map scripts. Or Perhaps a decorator mode where a lot of players just get a whole lot of pleasure from playing Terra Nil for the zen nature of the game. So where you can use the assets and the plants and the animals in the game to decorate the landscape just how you want. But these are all just ideas at the moment.
And then the last question I have for you, Sam, is when does your game come out and what platforms will it be on at launch?
So we will be announcing the release date very shortly. I can't tell you the exact release date yet, but it will be out on Steam for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and it will be on mobile for Android and iOS, but with Netflix games. So if you have a Netflix subscription, you'll get it for free.
That's awesome. And then because I just have to ask it, this game seems like it'd be really good on Nintendo Switch. I own Broforce on Nintendo Switch. Any plans for Nintendo Switch?
We're talking at the moment about console ports. We would love to play it on Switch. We're just gonna have to figure it out and get through the launch window first.